As the US proxy war with Russia continues unfolding in Ukraine, and as the world's attention is fixated there, I want to talk a little bit about growing US-Chinese tensions and a very similar conflict the US is trying to provoke with Beijing over Taiwan. I want to get into the whole background of that. I want to go over a military assistance package the US put together, very similar to the ones it puts together for Ukraine. I want to talk about the details of that package and the reality behind US military assistance for Taiwan. I want to talk about the Taiwan International Solidarity Act working its way through US Congress and how this is a stepping stone on the path toward war, a very deliberate one at that. And I also want to talk about these news stories that we're seeing across the Western media about Chinese and Russian warships sailing off the coast of the United States and how the US is using this as justification for their own provocations by sailing off the coast of China. And what I'm going to do that the Western media does not do is show you where all of this is taking place on a map, so you can judge for yourself whether it's comparable. Now, regarding the aid package, I wrote an article for New Eastern Outlook titled US Arms Package to Taiwan, Heralds, Ukraine, Part 2. And I'm going to read a little bit from this article. It says, the United States has announced a new weapons package for Taiwan worth up to $345 million US. Reuters, and the article is right here, Reuters, in an article covering the package, would suggest it was aimed at providing Taiwan with security assistance. In reality, the transfer of weapons from the US to Taiwan is a violation of Chinese sovereignty under international law, which recognizes Taiwan as an island province of China. More than that, the United States recognizes Taiwan as an island province of China. And I've gone over this many times before, and I will continue bringing this up. This is the official U.S. Department of State website, state.gov, U.S. relations with Taiwan. Here it says the United States does not have diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Why not? Because it is not a country. The United States maintains the American Institute in Taiwan to carry out their unofficial relations with Taiwan because it's not a country, and so there's no US embassy there. And down here, very clearly, it says, we do not support Taiwan independence. And if it's not independence, then it's a dependent, and that's because it is recognized under international law and officially by the US government as part of China, the People's Republic of China, whose government is located in Beijing, not Taipei. It's very important to understand this, to understand why China continues building up its military in and around the Taiwan Strait, why China needs to have a large military is because the United States is provoking China, not near its territory, but from within its territory. By violating China's sovereignty, by shipping arms to separatist elements on Taiwan, the United States is neither providing for Taiwan's security nor underwriting regional stability, as Washington often claims its presence in the region, thousands of miles from its own shores, is meant to achieve. A factor further undermining Washington's claims of providing for Taiwan's security through such arms transfers is the very nature of these packages. Going back to the Reuters article, it says, in recent weeks, 4 sources told Reuters the package was expected to include 4 unarmed MQ-9A reconnaissance drones, but noted their inclusion could fall through as officials work through details on removing some of the advanced equipment from the drones that only the US Air Force is allowed access to. So they're unarmed. There's only 4 of them, and they will be stripped down of technology that makes them as effective as possible. Is this arms package, are items like these stripped down unarmed drones, are these meant to actually enhance Taiwan's security, or is this meant simply to provoke China? I've talked about other items that the US has sent, Harpoon missiles, for example. I've explained how all of these weapon systems fall far short of actually providing for Taiwan's defense, if it was even justifiable to do so, which it isn't. I want to talk about the drones in a little more detail. Western drone technology, including US Reaper drones as well as the Turkish Bayraktar TB2 drones, have proven to be ineffective in combat roles against peer or near-peer competitors, namely Russia, as seen during the fighting in Ukraine and also in Syria. I think people may remember this incident over the Black Sea. From CNN, Russian fighter jet forces down US drone over the Black Sea. And the way Russia did this was not by shooting it down. They dumped fuel in the path of this drone, and it disrupted and damaged the propeller, causing it to crash. There's also this from Air and Space Forces magazine. Russian fighter damages a second MQ-9 over Syria. They downed one over the Black Sea. Regarding the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, they have now damaged 2 MQ-9 Reaper drones operating illegally in Syrian airspace, without even having to resort to Russia's formidable air defense capabilities or their air-to-air capabilities. They are able to disrupt and even down these drones. When we consider how China operates many of the same types of air defense systems Russia has, they've bought several batteries worth of S-400 systems, for example, how they've acquired Russian warplanes such as the Sukhoi Su-35S, how they've developed their own comparable warplanes. We can begin to understand how meaningless this weapons package to Taiwan actually was. It is solely meant to provoke China. It will not provide for Taiwan's security at all, just like weapons being shipped to Ukraine right now are not going to provide for Ukraine's security. It will only ensure Ukraine's destruction to a much more thorough completion. Other weapon systems that we've heard being sent to Taiwan include the Patriot air defense system. I've talked about this at length in regards to the Patriot system being sent to Ukraine. I've talked about how questionable its capabilities even are. And then I've also talked about the fact that the military industrial output of the US prevents them from producing enough interceptors required for all of the users around the world to actually operate them. Saudi Arabia, for example, I've talked about this. Saudi Arabia may run out of interceptor missiles in months. As Houthi rebel attacks escalate, Riyadh has an urgent situation as it runs out of missiles for its air defense system. What air defense system are they talking about? The US-made Patriot air defense system. They were running out of interceptors. The US couldn't make them fast enough. Saudi Arabia had to borrow missiles from its neighbors. Ukraine is using far more of these missiles than Saudi Arabia ever did. There's no way US military industrial output can sustain Ukraine's required rate of fire for their Patriot missile systems. And if the separatist forces on Taiwan end up in a shooting war with the rest of China, they most certainly will not have enough interceptors. I end the article by writing, China, with its much larger military, economy, industrial capacity, is surely positioned to counter similar tactics used by the US and its allies in regards to undermining its sovereignty over Taiwan and using the island province as part of a wider US policy of encirclement. That Washington continues to pursue its current policy of encirclement toward China, despite the military means by which it seeks to do so with, have already proven insufficient against Russia and Ukraine, indicates a lack of options and, in a sense, a growing sense of desperation in Washington. U.S. foreign policy centers on the singular pursuit of global primacy, despite growing evidence the U.S. no longer possesses the military or economic means to do so. Will Washington continue spending military, political, and economic resources on dwindling returns against a re-emerging Russia and a rising China? Or will the US finally abandon its increasingly unrealistic pursuit of global primacy and adopt a more rational policy of working among other nations rather than attempting to impose itself upon all other nations. It is a decision that if Washington doesn't make for itself now, others will make for it in the near future. I had Alex Christoforou and Alexander Mercouris of the Duran on my live stream the other week, and this was a sentiment they also shared, that if the US does not make this decision to abandon this failed pursuit of global hegemony and invest in multipolarism, the decision will be made for them. Now, that's the weapons package. As you can see, the US is setting Taiwan up for the exact same fate Ukraine is suffering right now, only it's much worse because the US is provoking all of this within Chinese territory. Taiwan is part of China, whether people like that reality or not. That is a fact that even the US Department of State's own website admits. I want to talk about the Taiwan International Solidarity Act. All of these links will be in the video description below, so you can go and check this out and look into it yourself. It says, this bill requires the Department of State to annually report to Congress on efforts by China to undermine Taiwan's participation in international organizations or Taiwan's relationships with other countries. But we just saw that the US State Department doesn't recognize Taiwan as a country, so why should it be participating in international organizations? And why should it have relationships with other countries if it itself is not a country? The US Taiwan International Solidarity Act runs in contravention to Washington's own official position on the status of Taiwan. It also runs in contravention of international law. UN Resolution 2758, restoration of the lawful rights of the People's Republic of China in the United Nations. It's right here. It reads, the representatives of the government of the People's Republic of China are the only lawful representatives of China to the United Nations, and that the People's Republic of China is one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. The resolution expelled forthwith the representatives of Chiang Kai-shek from the place which they unlawfully occupy at the United Nations and in all the organizations related to it. And so here is the Taiwan International Solidarity Act passed unilaterally by the United States, attempting to overwrite both America's own position on Taiwan and international law along with it. And UN Resolution 2758, that was passed all the way back in the 1970s. So this is not something new. This is the status of Taiwan. This is what it has been for decades. It was the US and the US alone has been working ceaselessly to undermine this issue that has already been resolved. I want to point out how in other UN documents, you will see mention of Taiwan as an island province of China. So here, this is from 2003, Final Clauses of Multilateral Treaties. It's a handbook put out by the United Nations. And in it, it says, regarding the Taiwan province of China, the Secretary General follows the General Assembly's guidance incorporated in Resolution 2758 of the General Assembly of the 25th of October, 1971, on the restoration of the lawful rights of the People's Republic of China in the United Nations. The General Assembly decided to recognize the representatives of the government of the People's Republic of China as the only legitimate representatives of China to the United Nations. Hence, instruments received from the Taiwan province of China will not be accepted by the Secretary General in his capacity as the depositary. So that is very clear. The United Nations is very clear. Taiwan is an island province of China. It is not an independent country. It is not an independent nation. It has no representation in the United Nations except through the People's Republic of China in Beijing. I've already gone over US relations with Taiwan on the US State Department's official website. They mention several things. They mention their joint communiques with China. They also mention the 6 assurances in the Taiwan Relations Act. But if you actually look into what all of those are meant to contradict and overwrite the 3 communiques they actually had with China. So they agreed with China through these communiques that Taiwan is part of China and that they will have normal relations with the People's Republic of China in Beijing, but then they passed the Taiwan Relations Act and the Six Assurances, vowing to undermine that agreement they made with China. It is a very blatant double game that they're playing. They just hope no one actually looks into any of this. And I want to go over the language in one of these communiques from 1972. It's often referred to as the Shanghai Communique, and this is what it says. The United States acknowledges that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain that there is but one China and that Taiwan is a part of China. The United States government does not challenge that position. It reaffirms its interests in a peaceful settlement of the Taiwan question by the Chinese themselves. They do not challenge that position that Taiwan is a part of China, that there's only one China and Taiwan is part of it. That's what they said in their agreement, with their communiques with China. And yet ever since then, they have worked ceaselessly to undermine it. And it is the United States, and solely the United States, that is at the center of these growing tensions with China over Taiwan. Taiwan's special status is the sole product of US political and military interference within Chinese territory. From the 1950s to the 1970s, the US had thousands of troops stationed on Taiwan. They were militarily occupying Taiwan to prevent China from fully reincorporating it as its territory. After the 1970s, the US continued pouring billions and billions of dollars worth of military equipment into Taiwan, building up the forces there to prevent China from fully reincorporating, reunifying all of its territory under international law. They have also maintained a naval presence around Taiwan, both in terms of tens of thousands of US troops being stationed in South Korea, Japan, now also the Philippines, but they also regularly sail their warships, not only around Taiwan, but through the Taiwan Strait itself. So now we're getting very close to talking about these stories of Russian and Chinese ships sailing off of US coast. We'll get to that in just a moment. And that is what the US is militarily doing to underwrite the existence of these separatist forces on Taiwan, because without this US support, these separatists would not exist. They would not exist politically, and they would not exist as a military threat to the rest of China. But I want to talk about the political interference. I've talked about how the US builds up opposition parties all around the globe through the National Endowment for Democracy and its various subsidiaries. I want to show you one of those subsidiaries, the National Democratic Institute. This is their website, and this is their page on Taiwan specifically. And it says, in the last 2 decades, NDI has provided support to increase political party institutional capacity, conducted election observation and assessment missions to ensure credible elections, and connected Taiwan's political party leaders to counterparts across the region. NDI currently works with Taiwan's civic tech community, which has emerged as a global leader on fighting the growing threat to digital information integrity. Could you imagine if Russia or China maintained a similar program operating within America's political space? It would be unthinkable. The United States would not tolerate it for a moment. It would be declared, and rightly so, illegal under international law, a blatant violation of US sovereignty and political independence, and everyone involved would either be expelled or go to jail. And yet this is what the United States openly admits it's doing in Taiwan, an island recognized as part of China under international law, and also under the One China policy the US agreed to with Beijing. The National Endowment for Democracy and its subsidiaries also created something known as the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. And essentially what this is the NED franchise operating in Taiwan. And the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy works together with the National Endowment for Democracy. They exchange staff, they work together on projects, they co-sponsor events like this right here, the World Movement for Democracy. Whatever the US says, its justification is for interfering in Taiwan, which it officially recognizes as part of Chinese territory. The reality is it seeks to enhance its own military position in the region vis-a-vis China. Ideally, it would like to station its military forces in the tens of thousands on Taiwan, as it has in the past. It's attempting to create a political and also military foothold, not near China, but within China's own territory, right off the coast of mainland China. And just as the US used lies about weapons of mass destruction to justify the invasion of Iraq, or the responsibility to protect to justify it and NATO's intervention in Libya and the complete destruction of that country, the US is using the lie of promoting democracy and protecting Taiwan's freedom to justify military aggression within and along China's borders. That is what all of this is about. And that is a great segue into this discussion of US ships off of China's coast and Chinese and Russian ships off of America's coast. You may have seen articles like this in the past week or two. US dispatches warships after China and Russia send naval patrol near Alaska. Combined naval patrol appeared to be the largest such flotilla to approach US territory, and highly provocative expert says. And I've heard this argument made when China complains about the US sailing about 80 kilometers off the coast of mainland China. People will say, well, China sails its ships off the coast of America. But let's look a little deeper into these accusations. You have to scroll very far down into the article to even see where in Alaska this is happening. It says, senators from Alaska said the flotilla in question was made up of 11 Chinese and Russian warships working in concert near the Aleutian Islands. And if you're not familiar with Alaska and its geography, I think now is a good time to take a look at the map. Let's look at where the United States is right here. I think this should be familiar to everyone. This is where the vast majority of Americans live and work, here. And then you have to go through Canada all the way up north here to Alaska. And you have mainland Alaska, and then you have this little tail that stretches all the way to Russia. These are the Aleutian Islands. This is where they're talking about Russian and Chinese ships sailing, here near the Aleutian Islands. Not off the coast of mainland Alaska, not off the coast of California or Washington or Oregon, but all the way over here near the Aleutian Islands, right at the very end of the Aleutian Islands, no less. And we know that because there's other articles talking about this. We have this from Forbes talking about the same topic. And they talk about the islands of Amchitka and Attu and Adak. So again, going back to the map, let's zoom in. Where's Attu Island? It's right here. It's all the way at the end of the Aleutian Islands. Where's Adak? Right there, right near Attu. And Amchitka, also right there, right in this same area. So that is actually where these Chinese and Russian ships are. Technically, in the most technical sense, they are sailing off the coast of US territory. But you can see how far that is, even from Alaska's mainland, and you can see how much further that actually is from the rest of the United States. Now let's look at the map again. And let's just say the United States was minding its own business. They didn't have a single military base abroad, and Russian and Chinese ships were sailing through here. You might make an argument and say, well, look, the United States is minding its own business. Why are you coming close? Why can't you go further west and avoid the Aleutian Islands altogether? Why can't you do that? And that they might have an argument to make there. But when you consider that the United States has tens of thousands of troops here in Japan, mainland Japan, also in Okinawa here, and now they're building up a presence here in the Philippines. They have scores, if not hundreds, of US troops quietly expanding their presence on Taiwan itself. And when the US is sailing its warships, they are sailing it right between the island province of Taiwan and mainland China. Here, is that comparable to China and Russia sailing ships past the Aleutian Islands? And the answer is so clearly no, it isn't. It's not even close to comparable. If Russia and China are trying to send a message to the United States, they're doing so in the most subtle and restrained way possible. And now I think you have a very clear picture of what is going on over Taiwan, how the United States is setting up Taiwan to be a catastrophe of equal or greater proportions to the disaster the United States created for Ukraine. You can see the history of America's double dealing with China over the status of Taiwan, and how the United States and its double dealing runs contra to international law as well. And now you can see the game that they are playing, projecting onto Russia and China what the US itself is doing to both nations, and especially China, with its freedom of navigation exercises that include going through the Strait of Taiwan 80 to 100 kilometers off the coast of mainland China. You can see just how far away Russia and China are from the actual real coast. The coasts we would say are comparable to the coast of mainland China. You can see actually how far Russian and Chinese ships maintain their distance. So I hope this helps people understand who is actually driving these tensions. I think if we took this situation and flipped the script, and it was China doing this to the United States 80 to 100 kilometers off its coast, encouraging separatism somewhere within US territory, I think you can begin to appreciate how restrained, impatient China has been all of this time in regards to Taiwan. And people who want to make the arguments, this is the last point I'll make and end on. People want to say, Brian, you know, Crimea was allowed to decide for themselves to join Russia. Why can't Taiwan decide for itself to be independent? And the answer to that question is, these are two completely different situations. One was in reaction to US interference. The US overthrowing the elected government of Ukraine and installing a client regime that was explicitly anti-Russian, causing the people of Crimea who identify as Russian to seek to join the Russian Federation. A very clear-cut case of cause and effect. Taiwan and its pursuit of independence is a product of, not a reaction to, US interference. The US is creating the political forces pushing for independence. And when you really think about it, the people of Crimea were serving their best interests by joining the Russian Federation. They avoided the catastrophe that unfolded afterwards from 2014 onward, the death and destruction, the division that Ukraine was caught up in. Crimea largely escaped all of that. Taiwan, by pursuing independence, would not be serving the best interests of the people living there. They would actually be working against them. And it's very simple to illustrate this. This is where Taiwan trades. Exports. Almost half of their exports go to the rest of China, between Hong Kong and the rest of China, mainland China. And in terms of imports, a very large and important segment comes from the rest of China. And these are inputs, crucial inputs needed for Taiwan's chip industry and electrical component industry. They're two biggest, most important industries. If Taiwan pursues independence and irrationally cuts its economic ties with the rest of China, its economy will be destroyed. And that does not serve the best interests of the people living there. And by pursuing independence, they would have only one option, and that is to host US military right off the coast of the rest of China, where the US seeks to wage war to contain China. In Asia, thousands and thousands of miles away from where the US is actually located on the map. So as we can see, it is not the same as Crimea or the Donbass. Pursuing independence does not serve the best interests of the people living on the island province of Taiwan. It works clearly against them. So please, let's keep all of these facts in mind. The US is going to continue pushing for this conflict with China, just as they did with Russia over Ukraine. Keep all of these facts in mind because they are going to be very persistent and attempt to be very persuasive in their arguments. And we have to get ahead of this if we're going to prevent the type of catastrophe we see now unfolding in Ukraine. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing to my channel. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. I also listed all of the links that I referenced in this video. There are also ways there that you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel. If you see an ad pop up, feel free to skip it. It's not helping me out at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon. And to everyone who has been helping out, thank you so much. That is what makes this work possible. So thank you again. And as always, thank you for watching.